It all started when Emma and David Pearson decided they needed a nanny. Their jobs were demanding, and with a newborn and a 5-year-old, they were struggling to keep up. The small, tight-knit community they lived in didn't have many options, and after weeks of searching, they were starting to lose hope. That's when the letter arrived. It was an old-fashioned envelope, sealed with red wax and addressed in elegant handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of parchment paper. The letter read,
"Dear Mr. and Mrs. Pearson, I have heard of your need for a nanny and would be delighted to offer my services. I come with years of experience and excellent references. If you are interested, I will arrive at your home tomorrow evening. Sincerely, Nanny Blackwood."
There was no phone number, no address, and no references attached. It seemed strange, but they were desperate. That evening, they discussed the letter, eventually convincing themselves it was a sign, a stroke of luck. They decided to give Nanny Blackwood a chance. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a knock echoed through their home. Standing on the doorstep was a tall, thin woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her eyes, a piercing shade of green, seemed to see right through them. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Pearson. I am Nanny Blackwood," she said in a soft, melodic voice. She stepped inside, her presence immediately commanding respect. The children, Timmy and baby Sophie, seemed to take to her instantly. Timmy, usually shy around strangers, was soon sitting at her feet, listening intently to her stories. Baby Sophie, who had been fussy all day, fell asleep in her arms within minutes. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. Nanny Blackwood was efficient, caring, and the children adored her. She cooked delicious meals, kept the house spotless, and even managed to teach Timmy some basic reading and math skills. Emma and David were thrilled. But then, strange things began to happen. It started with small, almost unnoticeable events. Timmy's toys would move from one room to another, and Sophie's crib would sometimes be found rocking on its own. One night, Emma heard whispers coming from the nursery. She tiptoed to the door and peeked inside. Nanny Blackwood was standing over Sophie's crib, murmuring in a language Emma didn't recognize. The air felt colder, and a sense of dread washed over her. When she confronted Nanny Blackwood the next morning, the nanny simply smiled and said she was singing a lullaby from her homeland. Emma tried to brush off her unease, but it grew harder each day. Timmy's behavior started to change. He became distant, his eyes often glazed over as if he were in a trance. He began drawing disturbing pictures of dark figures and shadowy creatures. When Emma asked him about them, he would only say, "Nanny told me about them." One night, David woke to find Nanny Blackwood standing at the foot of their bed, watching them sleep. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Everything is as it should be," she replied, her voice dripping with an unsettling calmness. She turned and left the room, leaving them in a state of fear and confusion. The next day, Emma decided to do some research. She scoured the internet for any information on Nanny Blackwood, but found nothing. It was as if she didn't exist. Desperate, she called the previous nannies they had interviewed, but none had heard of her. When she asked the neighbors, they too were clueless. That evening, Emma and David decided to confront Nanny Blackwood and ask her to leave. As they approached the nursery, they heard Timmy and Nanny Blackwood talking. Peeking through the slightly open door, they saw Nanny Blackwood holding a small, black book, whispering to Timmy, who was staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. "Nanny, it's time for you to leave," David said, his voice firm. Nanny Blackwood slowly turned to face them, her green eyes now burning with an eerie light. "I cannot leave," she said softly. "The children need me." Emma stepped forward, her fear giving way to anger. "We are their parents. We decide who stays and who goes." Nanny Blackwood's expression hardened. "You do not understand. They are marked. They are mine now." As she spoke, the room grew colder, and shadows seemed to stretch and writhe on the walls. Emma lunged for Timmy, but an invisible force threw her back. David rushed to her side, and together they tried to reach their children, but it was as if an unseen barrier held them back. Nanny Blackwood began chanting in that strange language again, the words twisting and echoing through the room. The black book in her hands seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Desperate, David grabbed a candlestick from a nearby table and swung it at the book. The moment it made contact, there was a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar. When the light faded, Nanny Blackwood was gone. The room returned to normal, the coldness and shadows dissipating. Timmy and Sophie were unharmed, but they were both deeply shaken. The black book lay on the floor, now nothing more than a pile of ashes. The Pearsons left the house that night, staying with Emma's sister until they could figure out what to do. They eventually moved to a new home in a different town, hoping to leave the horrors of Nanny Blackwood behind. But the memory lingered, a dark shadow over their lives. Timmy never fully recovered. He rarely spoke of that time, but sometimes Emma would catch him staring out the window, a look of fear in his eyes, as if he were waiting for Nanny Blackwood to return. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled and the house creaked, Emma swore she could hear faint whispers, reminding her that some nightmares never truly end. Claire and Michael Johnson needed a nanny for their 3 children. They turned to an agency known for its thorough vetting process. They were thrilled when they were matched with Evelyn Harper, a woman with impeccable credentials and years of experience. She arrived on a sunny Monday morning, and from the moment she stepped into their home, she seemed to fit perfectly. Evelyn was in her late 30s, with dark hair neatly tied back and warm, kind eyes. She had a calming presence that immediately put the children, Lucy 8, Ben 6, and Emma 4, at ease. She quickly established a routine, and the Johnson household seemed to run smoother than ever. One day, a week after Evelyn had started, Claire was cleaning out the attic when she came across an old, ornate mirror wrapped in a dusty cloth. It had belonged to her grandmother and had been stored away for years. Intrigued, she decided to bring it down and place it in the hallway. When Evelyn saw the mirror, her face paled. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice unusually sharp. "In the attic," Claire replied. "It's an old family heirloom." "Why?" Evelyn composed herself quickly, but her unease lingered. "It's beautiful," she said, forcing a smile. "It just startled me, that's all." That night, Claire woke to a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, coming from the hallway. She got up and quietly made her way towards the sound. The whispers seemed to be emanating from the mirror. As she approached, the whispers ceased, and she saw only her own reflection, pale and confused. She shook her head, convinced it was just her imagination, and returned to bed. Over the next few days, the children began to act strangely. Lucy, who had always been cheerful and talkative, became withdrawn and sullen. Ben started having violent nightmares, waking up screaming in terror. Little Emma, who loved to play, now spent hours staring into the mirror, her eyes vacant. Claire's concern grew, and she decided to discuss it with Evelyn. "Have you noticed anything strange about the children lately?" she asked. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "I have. I think it might have something to do with that mirror. It gives me a bad feeling." Claire decided to move the mirror back to the attic. As she lifted it, she caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the reflection. She spun around, but no one was there. Her heart raced as she quickly covered the mirror and hauled it back to the attic. That night, the strange occurrences escalated. Claire woke to find Emma standing by her bed, staring at her with blank eyes. "Emma, honey, what are you doing?" she whispered, gently shaking her. Emma blinked, her eyes slowly focusing. "The lady in the mirror told me to come here," she said in a monotone voice. Claire's blood ran cold. "What lady, Emma?" "The lady with the long, dark hair. She says she wants to play with us." Claire rushed to wake Michael, and together they went to check on Lucy and Ben. Both children were sound asleep, but their faces were contorted in fear, as if trapped in a nightmare. Evelyn joined them, her face pale with worry. "We need to get rid of that mirror," Evelyn said urgently. "It's dangerous." Michael agreed, and they decided to burn it the next morning. They all slept in the living room that night, too afraid to stay upstairs. As they huddled together, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The mirror, now covered and locked in the attic, seemed to radiate an evil presence. At dawn, Michael and Claire carried the mirror to the backyard. Evelyn stayed with the children, keeping them as far away as possible. They doused the mirror with gasoline and set it alight. The fire roared to life, and for a moment the reflection of the shadowy figure could be seen writhing in the flames, its face twisted in a silent scream. As the mirror cracked and shattered, the whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Back inside, the children began to wake from their troubled sleep. Their faces relaxed, and they slowly returned to their normal selves. Claire and Michael thanked Evelyn for her help and decided to do some research on the mirror's origins. They discovered that the mirror had once belonged to a distant relative who was rumored to be involved in dark practices. It was said that she used the mirror to communicate with spirits, trapping them within its glass. The mirror had been passed down through generations, its dark history forgotten until now. With the mirror destroyed, the Johnson family felt a heavy weight lift from their home. The children's behavior returned to normal, and the nightmares ceased. Evelyn stayed with them for a few more months, helping them regain their sense of security. One evening, as Evelyn was tucking the children into bed, Claire pulled her aside. "Thank you for everything you've done. We couldn't have gone through this without you." Evelyn smiled warmly. "I'm just glad I could help." As Evelyn left the room, Claire noticed something strange. In the reflection of a small decorative mirror on the wall, she thought she saw a flicker of that same shadowy figure. She blinked, and it was gone. She shook her head, convincing herself it was just her imagination. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that some remnants of the mirror's dark past might still linger, watching and waiting from the shadows.